Hi, I'm Sasan Kasravi with Proteus Debate Academy. It's Medium Form Monday. And today our topic is advantage structure, which is a structure of arguments that we would use anytime we're talking in a debate about something that is about a policy action. So pretty much in all forms of policy debate, but also oftentimes in parliamentary debate or Lincoln Douglas or even public forum, you would want to apply this structure. Now, it's less common for it to be used with these specific terms attached in something like high school public forum, but I think it's still a very important structure to keep in mind that you can model your arguments after, and in fact, I do, even if I'm not calling it by these names. So first, let's talk about why we would use structure in the first place. Well, most of you would have probably guessed that it makes your arguments easier to follow, which is definitely an important reason, but it has benefits beyond just that. It also ensures that your argument doesn't have any glaring weaknesses. Anytime I hear arguments that don't have one of the parts of the advantage structure, that keys me in on what response, what counter argument to make against this argument. And in fact, a lot of debate structure, wherever we're talking about it, derives more from trying to be defensive against potential responses than someone just deciding one day that this is what an argument should look like. On top of that, it also makes writing arguments much more efficient. That's something that is super helpful in parliamentary debate, but also just generally, it helps you make arguments on the fly and write arguments that are solid and good very quickly. And it's sort of the idea behind how good impromptu speakers are so good at coming up with these great speeches very quickly, which is that they have a skeleton of a structure, a shell in mind already, and then they just fill in the details as they go. So I think that an advantage basically follows normal story structure, which, unless you're awful at telling stories, has a beginning, a middle, and an end in that order. You can get all Pulp Fiction with it if you want in a regular story, but when you're trying to be clear, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to be like, and then I got home. But where was I, you ask? That's not a very good story if you're trying for clarity, which we are in debate. And what we also want to add for clarity is the moral in the end. A normal story might leave that as subtext, but subtext isn't really effective or reliable in something like competitive debate. So the next step is to keep in mind that these stories are framed around a action that we take. So we would just change this to what something was like before the action, what action gets taken, the effect of that action on the situation before, and why that matters, which is our moral. And use jargon for these, and this becomes advantage structure. So these terms, uniqueness, link, internal link, and impact, represent exactly what's above them. And the hardest part for people starting to learn about advantages is memorizing these specific terms and keeping straight what each one means. And I think the easiest way is to just remember that there's 4 steps, and they're before the action taken, the effect of the action, and why that matters. Eventually, everyone memorizes uniqueness, link, internal link, and impact. So don't worry about having to cram that in right away. So here's what a shell for an advantage would look like. And this is actually the exact shell that many people, including my college team that I coach, uses in parliamentary debate and LD and whatever. And you can see that there's specific numbers of subpoints under that. That'll be different from team to team. This is what I recommend. I think it's a really effective structure. And those X's don't represent an arbitrary number of arguments. They actually refer to specific things that we want to fill in. But on the left is what your advantage should look like in your flow. So let's apply this with a specific example, and the action that we're going to be talking about is getting a dog. I thought this dog looked really cute, has a little mustache, but then he was really hard to crop out of a white background, and now I hate him. But let's pretend I still want to get him. Well, we're going to start with having advantage 1 be called companionship, because let's say that's what this advantage is about. An advantage is a replacement for contentions. So you'd have more than one in a debate if you'd like. So let's talk about the uniqueness. The uniqueness, as we already mentioned, describes the status quo as it relates to the issue that you want to change. But more than that, if you are the affirmative, you want to describe that status quo in a way that makes it sound bad. I should say bad. Yeah, there we go. And the negative wants to show that it's good. Why? The reason is because the affirmative is advocating for changing it. So if you're advocating for changing something, it helps to show that it's bad. Similarly, on the negative, you want to show that the thing you're advocating for keeping is good. Now, it's possible to make a good thing better, and it's possible to make a bad thing worse. It's just not very persuasive. This is the subject of another topic which we talk about, which is called controlling the uniqueness. But suffice it to say that you want to show that the status quo is bad if you're going to change it. In addition to that, the uniqueness is a great place for you to include precedence. Also the subject of another video, but precedence is basically the idea that we know the thing you're going to say will happen is going to happen because it already happened that way once before, or it's happening that way right now somewhere else in the world. Now let's talk about what those specific points that we had would be. Well, the first is that the status quo is bad. Pretty straightforward. And after that, you want to follow it with the status quo will continue to be bad, or that the status quo is going to get worse. Why do you want to do this? Well, it's a great tool defensively because your opponent might have prepared some reason for why the economy right now is good, but if you have evidence for why it's going to get worse, you may be able to say even if the economy is good right now, it's about to get bad, meaning that there's still reason to do this. In addition to that, I like for the third uniqueness point to be the precedence. So here's how this worked before, or here's how this is working somewhere else. And your precedence is for the link causing the internal link, which is confusing, but it's just the action you're advocating for has led to the result you say it will. So let's apply this to the specific topic. So their first uniqueness point would be, I am so lonely. This is describing that the status quo is bad. After that, you will want to talk about, I'm going to be even more lonely soon. And the third uniqueness point, the precedence, can be getting a dog has been shown to decrease loneliness. And the uniqueness one, I am so lonely, think of that as your claim, and beneath that you would have your evidence. So if you're doing a carded format of debate, the bigger stuff is the tag, and then beneath that is the text of your card. Or you might have more than one card proving each thing. If you're doing something like parliamentary debate, you can just elaborate on it and give evidence, sort of like you're seeing written here. So here's what that looks like in our shell so far. If I am doing something off the top of my head and I sort of know the arguments, I might not write down all the details. Like, for example, if I'm trying to make something really quickly off the top of my head. But if I'm writing a case and I'm planning to use what I'm writing as a script, I would obviously include the little subtext beneath it. The rest of this argument we can talk about sort of staying in this shell. So the link, as you can probably guess, is just what action you take, which in this case is get a dog. Now, B and C I don't think are always necessary, but it is useful to do. It might be a little too technical for some instances. I wouldn't include it in like it complicates things and it requires the judge to be a little bit more structured and organized, which is why I wouldn't include it in something like a more lay approach. But they're basically just a spotlight and a spillover argument. What this does is it says not only do we take this action, but this action causes other things to happen inherently. So spotlight's like other people see that this is an issue because we bring attention to it. A spillover is by us doing this, the people who model their actions after us are more likely to also do it. You would do this because it gives you more impacts. But so the internal link, the result is I become less lonely. And similarly, right, with these extra ones, you could say now people who model this or people who are paying attention are more likely to also do something. So this is sort of defensive against some of the arguments that say you don't accomplish whatever, and it's a way of increasing your impact scope somewhat. And after that, you just get into the impacts or why it matters, and that's a whole topic for its own video. One thing to note is that on the negative, you wouldn't have an advantage to the plan. You would have a disadvantage to the plan. But the structure is exactly the same. The link, the action that you're talking about is the affirmatives action, or the action in the resolution. So the only difference would be that you're describing a status quo that is good becoming worse. So that's it for Medium Form Monday this week. Please write any questions you have in the comments. Happy to answer. And I hope that this is useful to you.